Hello and welcome to another short video about posted in the past. Over the past 20 or so years, I've researched hundreds of postcards, and all of them begin with the name and address of the recipient. That's where I begin my research, and all of the postcards are researched using the resources available to anyone doing their family history. So that would be census returns, passenger lists, probate records, marriage registers, anything that allows us to trace our ancestors. Of course, the difference between what I'm doing and perhaps what family historians are doing for their own research is that all of the people I'm researching aren't my relatives. They're just people that I have connected with through the postcards. So this is a lovely postcard of the prom at Cleethorpes, and it was posted in 1906. And if you see the reverse, you can see that I have the name and the address of the recipient, and there's also a message. And so this postcard was one that I researched for my first book. And although over the years I have researched cards that link with famous people, in the first book I had the maid who worked for a doctor who cared for Edward VII, a sailor aboard HMS Hampshire who drowned with Lord Kitchener, and in the second book other notable people. This card, actually, there's nothing famous or outrageous about the family, but I feel that it's an important card and possibly one of the most important cards that I've researched. And I say this because of the story that was revealed through the postcard, and the story behind actually the mother who received the card. The card was sent from a son to his mother in Burdett Street in Liverpool, which is a house near the docks in Liverpool. But I first found Emily Crease, as she was before she married, in Bath as a 10-year-old girl in 1861. And she was a servant. She was working for a laundress. Her family was a large one. Her father was an agricultural labourer, and she was born in Somerset. To find a child working isn't necessarily unusual. What I was struck by this card was that at this time she was only 10, and sometimes I will have found someone working and they were 12, 13, and that's bad enough, but to see that she was just a young 10-year-old girl. I found her 10 years later, still working in Bath, but for a different family, and still as a servant. Then she appears in Liverpool when she marries, and she marries Samuel Jones, who is a carpenter in Liverpool. And for a while, the family lived with his parents. Eventually, they moved to a different address, and then later they lived in Burdett Street. Burdett Street is still there today, and if you go onto Google, which is a wonderful resource for people doing any history research, you can walk down the street and see that it's a terrace, and you can see that leading up to the front doors, including the address the card was sent to, are some coloured tiles, and the ones that lead up to Emily's house are still there. I also found an estate agent's particulars for a house in the street that was up for sale, and as they're a terrace, all of the houses are the same footprint in theory. And looking at the estate agent's particulars showed me that the rooms were small, and that they would have been very the rooms would have been so small that the family would have actually had to share the rooms. And it wasn't unusual at this time for families to have lodgers as well living with them. So very, very cramped conditions for the family. Of course, the particulars that I looked at for the estate agent showed a lovely house with the original features, the lovely fireplaces, um, a lovely fitted kitchen and bathroom. And of course, that wouldn't have been the house that Emily would have recognised. Um, as nice as her home was to her, I'm sure, it would not have been as comfortable as we would like to imagine it, perhaps. And of course, they lived near the docks in Liverpool, and today Liverpool docks have been regenerated and they're a tourist attraction. When Emily was there with her family, it would have been a rough area, and given that Samuel was a carpenter and he worked on ships, the employment they had was possibly sporadic, and they certainly wouldn't have had much money. One of the things that strikes me about this card is what Emily experienced in comparison to her children. She would have been very, very poorly educated. When she signed the marriage register, for instance, she can sign her name, but it doesn't flow. It doesn't flow with the confidence that we write our own signatures today. Perhaps she learnt to sign her signature by copying it without necessarily appreciating what it meant. But of course, at this time, some people were just using a cross and couldn't sign their names. So it wouldn't have been unusual, perhaps, to have seen this for her. But anyway, looking at the family that she had with Samuel, her husband, it's clear that she and he were able to do something that her own parents couldn't do. They kept the children at home. Now, her own parents couldn't do that. And, we know at 10 years old she was working. And so her children appear on the census returns living at home. Not all of her children survived infancy. We can tell that from the 1911 census return, that some actually died. But we know, for instance, that the son who sent the postcard was educated because he can clearly write, and it is lovely, clear handwriting, and he actually works in the docks as a clerk. So that must have been more reliable employment and something that you couldn't do unless you were educated. A daughter that the couple had becomes a school teacher, and so she would have gone on to teach the next generation. And I think through this card sent from son to mother, we can see the social changes that came in at the end of the 19th and the early 20th century. She was born too early to benefit from the laws which made education compulsory, all of the things that perhaps today we take for granted. The only law really that she benefited from was limiting the working week for a child. And at the time she was working in Bath, her week would have been limited to 48 hours for a 10-year-old child. Now, if you think about the average working week today, for somebody who is leaving school, perhaps if they've left school when they're 16, 18, or they finish university, their average week, if they're working in an office, for instance, could be 35. It would be unusual to go over 40 for an average working week for some people. And even if it did go over those hours, it would be for overtime. It would be for the benefit of the employee as much as the employer. And very often today we were able to actually have the luxury of deciding if we want to do overtime. It isn't compulsory. And there you have a young girl who actually can't work more than 48 hours, but probably because she's living with the family she's working for, it probably would have been unlimited in some respects. So this postcard may not link to anyone rich or famous. It may not link to an actor, as I found in the second batch of postcards I researched for the book, second delivery. It may not be a famous artist that I have found. But I think that when I look at the story that the card tells me about, it's it's of importance, and she must have loved this card because clearly she kept it. It's in relatively good condition given its age. There's no real noticeable different damage to it. Some of the cards I've researched are very badly damaged, and I don't actually mind that because I think it demonstrates that they have been looked at and they've been handled, and they haven't been put in an album and are never looked at. You know, a pure postcard collector will want mint, and I'm interested in something slightly different. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that short insight into one of my favourite cards, and have a look at some of my other videos. And you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook, posted in the past, and look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.